Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Donyale Sexton, a professional copywriter who is currently writing her first book. Donyale, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
You ready to get started?
Yes, I am.
All right, question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, the best thing that I did in this process for myself was I pitched my concepts to professionals, agents, and editors, so publishing professionals at a festival. I went to one of these festivals where you can, as part of your ticket, you can get sort of a one-on-one with agents and, that you choose. And I chose agents and editors who were either working for publishing houses that I admired or agents who were representing people in the same genre that I'm writing in. And pitching that concept made a world of difference. So the feedback that I got, it was incredibly useful, and I knew it was coming from a source of people who know. And that little pitch that you give them is often the thing that they will read first to determine whether or not they're interested in you. So getting it right is important. Getting feedback, immediate feedback on anything that worries them is important. And the third thing I found is that the positive feedback that you get, if you're lucky and you get positive feedback, I think that really sustains you, because it's a long process writing a book. And when there are moments where you think, oh my goodness, am I the only person who cares about the story? And you remember that somebody who actually works in the trade, not your mum, not your best friend, said to you, that's very interesting, that is interesting, I would want to look at that when you're done. That often keeps you going. So pitching your concept to professionals, I think, is the most important thing I've learned on this journey so far.
And what have you found to be a really effective pitch? Because you bring up a great concept with pitching this to professionals. So what are some things that you've utilized that has worked out well?
I sat down and wrote my elevator pitch over and over again until I had got it as perfectly as I could. And I then pitched a lot of people. So, whenever you say to someone, oh, I'm a writer, I'm writing a book, or I'm working on a book, people immediately say, what is it about? And a lot of authors launch into a really long, convoluted explanation of why they're writing and what they care about. And actually, if you just have that elevator pitch ready to go, you practice it a bit first so that you know that when you deliver it, someone understands what you're after. You can hone it with a bit of effort and a bit of torturing the people you know and love.
Excellent. Yeah, that is great advice, and especially getting that first book out there, because you can really zero in on that one book. Obviously, when you have 2, 3, 4, 5 books, then it can be a little bit more challenging, but you can still zero in on certain areas and certain benefits that you're going to give to the reader, and I think it really helps with the pitch.
Absolutely. And there's so much guidance on writing a good pitch that's been provided by publishers and by agents and and by people in the industry. They're credible, you can trust them. There's so much great advice out there that you can find out how to write a pitch. And if you are a writer and that's how you see yourself, you should be able to distill what you're doing into those, few sentences, into those 70 words or whatever it is.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part so far about getting published?
Honestly, Paul, the hardest part, I think, is keeping going. I think that when you start the journey of writing a book, I'm a professional copywriter, so I'm used to writing, and I honestly thought that would make me write faster and get through the process really quickly. And I'm a couple of years in, and I'm on draft 6 of my manuscript. And all I can tell you is that it is a long process that I've found getting something just right. And you have to keep yourself going, because at some point it comes down to your faith in what you're doing. Either you're going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, you're not. And I'm at the point now where I suspect that perseverance is the difference between so many people's book always being something that they wish they would write, or they should write, or they say to people, oh, I've got to write this in a book one day, and someone who actually does it. It's that ability to keep going, because it's a lonely journey. It's you and your words. No matter how many people around you support you, you're the one who has to keep going back and carrying on with the work until it's right. And you have to keep working on it until it's ready. And maybe you're lucky and that's 3 drafts, and maybe you're me and that's 6 drafts. But you have to have that grit, that perseverance. So that's the hardest thing, is you've just got to keep going.
Yeah, I actually had a guest on recently from the UK, and what she did to help with keeping going is she actually has an app that she used called Stick, Stickk, and it's one of those things where you can enter accountability goals, but it takes a whole different twist on it, because you also enter in your bank account information, and if you don't hit your goals, then you can choose how much you want to give up. And what she did was she used it as extra motivation, because she was a big soccer fan. So the team that she supported was Arsenal. So what she did was, if she didn't hit her writing goal by the end of the week, then she was going to have to donate $250 to her arch rivals at Chelsea FC. So that gave her this incredible motivation to get it done, and she ended up knocking out 60,000 words over a certain length of time, because no way that she wanted to give up money to the rival football club that was against the team that she supported. So there's just such a unique and innovative thing. I just wanted to share that with you, because that seemed to have it's really worked for her and other authors that in her accountability group.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think two of the things that help me keep going, and one I think is really important, you often see books that are dedicated to a writer's family and to their significant partner. And I think that having someone who supports the time you've set aside, because I don't know any writers who are lucky enough to not have to have a day job while they're writing their first book. And for those, I think having someone who respects your time, having a really hard deadline like that lady set up, I think is really clever, because I would hate to be making a donation to something I don't love.
Yes.
Especially when it's a long process. But the other thing which I found is there's a lot of writers very active on Twitter. And for what it's worth, I suppose there's lots of negative things as well on Twitter, but there's a lot of writers on there. And I found writers who were in my area when I moved. And so even though I don't know them personally, I was able to sort of locate them on Twitter. And we have a 5 a.m. writers group, and because a lot of people have to write before they go to work. And even though that's a much softer accountability in the long haul, especially when you're working on a second or third draft, it's really lovely to have that sense of accountability and also camaraderie, also sort of support and encouragement.
Yeah, accountability is key. So it's just like when you're doing group workouts. I used this example on a previous show, was the guys that did the movie 300. They all had to stay incredibly fit, and they weren't necessarily hitting all their goals by working by themselves, but they formed a group, all the actors that are going to be in the movie, and they all pumped each other up. They kept each other accountable, motivated, just like a sports team would, where you had that accountability and you had that support. And I feel that same concept also works when you're writing your book, when having that accountability and being able to have that support system.
Absolutely. And there are loads of writers out there who are, you're not alone you're alone in your particular process, but you're not alone in the big view, and you're absolutely right. It has been a big difference to me getting through this current draft is just knowing that I talk to other writers, and a lot of the writers that I'm connected with are YA writers. They're young adult writers, and in a completely different world to me. And they sound like they're having a lot of fun, but we all have the same challenges, and we all have to get over the same humps. And to have someone who says, okay, you've had a bad week and you've not been on target, but you're going to do better next week, right? And it's another writer who completely understands where you're coming from. like that movie analogy. It's a great analogy. It's someone who completely understands where, whatever you're struggling with, but also still says, so you're gonna make up for this next week. You're gonna be on target next week, and you're like, yeah, I am. That's amazing.
Well, let's talk a little bit about marketing. So I know you're still a little early into this, but please share a marketing strategy that you're planning to use in your book launch that you feel is going to work well.
Where I do most of my copywriting is in digital marketing, for digital marketing campaigns. So this is something I'm quite passionate about, and it's something that's very familiar to me in terms of creating a marketing strategy and executing it. So the one thing that I think is super useful for writers is to go and do online courses. There's so many great courses that you can do online to educate yourself so that you understand what the components are, how you build a brand for yourself online, how you then build a community around that brand, how you invite your community to take actions that would be useful to you, like being able to review you. I don't believe that anyone, even a fantastic publishing house, will ever champion your work the way you will champion your own work. And so for me, going on to platforms like Udemy and HubSpot and LinkedIn and all of these great places that offer fairly inexpensive courses would actually allow an author, during that time that you are writing your book, to become quite well educated about how you are going to manage your brand online. Because even a very famous and very wealthy author, if you look at everyone from J.K. Rowling across Stephen King, these authors manage their own, many of their own social feeds, and those are the social feeds with the biggest engagement, because you know that you're connecting with that person that you admire as a writer. So if they know the technique that when someone compliments something or when someone says they like something, that they know how to direct that person to turn that approval into a rating or a review or an engagement that helps them at the end of the day reach more people. People like to read a book review by someone that they feel is like themselves. That's a stronger book review. So where you have someone in your community who's positive about your book and who's engaging with you online, to get that person to do a review is so powerful. It's so good for your brand. It's so good for getting other people to try your book or to give your book a chance. Because you've got to remember there's so many books being published, and I think we can get very, we have to be a little bit obsessive about our own books to get through the process of preparing them. So one thing that I've sort of observed is that if you can take that forward into the next step where you're also good at promoting your book, that is really a matter of educating yourself. And one thing that I would say is look out for the sales. So if you follow a lot of these platforms that do free online marketing training or digital training, and then they also have really great paid courses, often they'll have like a flash sale. So if you get their newsletter once a month, and you just keep your eye out for sale, there's courses that I've done that retail for $190 usually, and they've been on a flash sale for $15. And that's something that you can pick up and do that course. And it's really empowering to feel like you know how practically you can contribute to driving reviews online, which is probably the biggest single thing you can do with your own community. So from a strategy point of view, I would say educate yourself as an author, know how to build your own brand online. From there, as you build a community of fans around your book, be able to direct those fans to take actions like reviewing you, like recommending you to book clubs, or letting people know when you've been read in their book club, because that's something that you can control, and you can make a big difference to your book from there.
And that's a great strategy, because it makes all the difference building your own platform up, because it can support you not only for your first book, for your second book. I mean, that's how I did it for mine. I have 13 out there. So I completely agree with you about those strategies where you build that platform and you build that momentum as you keep going through each and every launch.
Yeah, and also, what if you, I mean, I think when I hear an author thinking that they will leave the marketing to their publishing house, and fair when it's hard to win a publishing deal. So if you self-publish, it's absolutely critical that you know how to do this. But I would say it's in the same sense that if you're going to leave all the editing to the editor, if you don't edit your own book, if you don't proofread your own book, I think it's the same thing as if you don't know how to manage your own profile online and to be participating in your own community. Because imagine if you changed publishers after 3 books, that marketing knowledge and intelligence has gone with that publisher when you change over. So take control of your own destiny, I suppose, as a writer.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
I'm completely useless in picking a favorite book because I read very, very widely and I read a lot of different authors. But I think my best answer to this question is the book that made me realize how much I wanted to write. And it was, of all books, it was a set work book at school. So in high school, it was one of those books that you're forced to read and then analyze to death. And it was the book Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now that's nobody's idea of the most brilliant literature that you've ever read. So the reason why this book was so important was I remember on the second read of the book, I suddenly got the humor of the time period, and I suddenly started laughing and realized that the book it's quite witty. There's quite funny bits through the book. Which you don't realize the first time you read it, and you're sort of struggling to understand the author's world. And in that moment, I realized that someone living, more than 100 years before me had sat in a completely different world and made a joke. And I was laughing about that joke, and I was reacting to that over 100 years later. In a completely different world, in a different continent, in a completely different set of circumstances, and that really struck me. That I thought that was so powerful. This idea that what you do as a writer, echoes on, and that you sort of reach across time and space to the people who read your work, and that powerful thing made me feel like, when I sit down to write, I take what I'm doing seriously. I don't treat it flippantly. I care about what I'm doing, and it gives a sense of joy and a sense of that this hard work, once it's done and it's published, it's there forever. It has its own sort of immortality, if that makes sense. And so I know that that's not sort of the classic thing. There was a book and there was a great lesson, but there was a book and there was this sort of sense of wow. And I was about 16 or 17 at the time, and that sense of wow hasn't left me. That this is actually possible if you're a writer, for you to create something that outlives you so long.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
It's a bit cheesy, but it's actually above my desk right now, and it's always somewhere where I can see it. So my favorite quote is, "The only way to do great work is to love what you do," by Steve Jobs. And one of the reasons that's such an important quote for me from a writing process point of view is, when you write your first draft and you're really excited about what you're doing and you think it's wonderful, and then you come back to it to write it, to do the second draft, and you have moments where you think, this is such a load of nonsense. What have I written? What was I thinking? You have to find a way to love the process, every step of the process. You can't just love the process of having ideas. You've got to love the process of making those ideas work. And then you've got to love the process of polishing them and getting them as perfect as you can in an imperfect world. And that quote just always reminds me not to get negative, and not to sink into a sense of, oh, it's so much work, or it's too much, or I'm no good, but to just keep going and keep loving the process. I think that's a great way to keep going. So that's my favorite quote.
Well, Donyale, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way to find me online is I have a little website, and it is myname.com. So it's really easy. So it's Donyale, DONYALE.com.
Well, Donyale, I want to thank you again for being a guest on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.